My mother RSVP'd yes to my wedding, promised she'd be there, and still took everyone on my side of the family to my sister Celia's gender reveal in Austin instead. So, on a warm Saturday morning in May of 2024, I walked past 24 empty seats in my white dress and married Rowan Fletcher without a single person from my side of the family showing up. They said they were tired. They said they had just traveled. They said we'd celebrate later. But 2 months after they left me standing there in that church, my phone lit up with calls, texts, and sudden concern from every one of them. They had just found out who my husband really was. My name is Althea Whitaker. I'm 36, and this is the story of how I stopped begging my family to choose me, and what happened when they realized too late that I was never the one they should have ignored. The distance was never the problem. They were. 2 weeks before the wedding, she had confirmed the RSVP herself. She had even asked if I wanted a separate table for my side of the family. I told her yes. I wanted everyone comfortable. I wanted everyone there. So, that morning, when I peeked through the side doorway and saw the left side of the church still empty, I told myself not to panic. Charleston traffic could be unpredictable on weekends. Flights ran late. Rental cars got delayed. People were people. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The wedding coordinator stepped quietly into the bride's room and lowered her clipboard. "We can hold another 10 if you want." I looked past her shoulder toward the nave. Guests on Rowan's side had mostly settled in. His parents were already seated in the front pew. His older sister had flown in from Boston the night before. One of his college friends was fixing a boutonniere that had come loose. They looked relaxed, present, ready. The entire section reserved for my family was still empty. "I think we should start on time," I said. The coordinator gave me a careful nod, the kind people use when they already understand more than you want them to. When she stepped out, Nadia adjusted the back of my dress and looked at me through the mirror. "You still have a few minutes." "So do they." She didn't answer that. She just squeezed my shoulder once. I heard the organ begin the first notes of the processional. My bouquet suddenly felt heavier than it had 5 minutes earlier. I moved toward the hallway that led to the side entrance of the sanctuary, and that was when my phone buzzed in my hand. 9:12 a.m. A text from my mother. "Sweetheart, we won't make it today. Celia's event ran longer than expected. We'll celebrate later." I read it twice because the words did not make sense the first time. Celia's event. My younger sister, Celia Whitaker, was in Austin that weekend for her gender reveal. She and her husband, Victor Mallory, had rented out part of a resort outside the city. There were custom desserts, a photographer, coordinated outfits, the whole glossy social media version of family joy. My parents had flown out 2 days earlier and told me they would fly back in time for the wedding. That had been the plan. That had been the promise. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred for a second. Nadia took the phone gently from my hand and read the message. "Oh, Althea." I did not cry. That is the part people always expect, and it never came. What I felt first was something flatter than heartbreak. It was recognition, that cold, clear sensation of realizing that the thing you hoped would be different had simply found a new way to be the same. The church doors opened. I stepped into the hallway, and Rowan turned when he heard movement. He was standing at the front, tall and still, one hand folded over the other. There was something steady about him even then, even with a room full of people and an empty section that was impossible not to notice. By the time I reached the entrance, he had already seen my face. He took one step closer. "Thea." I showed him the message. His jaw tightened, but only for a second. Then he reached for my hand, pressed my fingers once, and looked at me the way he always did when he wanted to hand my own strength back to me. "The people who matter are here." It was not a grand line. It was not meant for anyone else. That was why it worked. I nodded once. Then I walked down the aisle. I remember almost everything about those next 20 minutes with unnatural clarity. The way of Rowan's cousins smiled at me as if she could hold me upright from 3 pews away. The way the hem of my dress whispered against the runner. The way I kept my eyes fixed on Rowan, because if I looked left, I would see 24 empty chairs where my family should have been. Our priest spoke about covenant and choice and the daily discipline of love. I stood there and thought about the word choice, how simple it really was. People chose where they went. They chose what mattered enough to rearrange a flight for. They chose whose absence would trouble them. When the ceremony ended, everyone applauded. We kissed. Rowan's mother hugged me so tightly I nearly lost my breath. His father told me the church had never looked more beautiful. Someone handed me a glass of champagne before I had fully made it back down the aisle. I smiled for the photographs. I thanked people for coming. At the reception, held at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, I heard one of Rowan's friends ask him quietly if my family had gotten sick or stranded somewhere. They had another event, Rowan said. That was all. He did not cover for them, and he did not expose them either. He gave the truth the smallest shape possible and left it alone. By the time the cake was cut and the last of the older relatives had drifted out to waiting Ubers, I knew something in me had settled. Not healed, not even broken exactly. Settled, like dust after something heavy hits the floor. I was done trying to make my family choose me. After the wedding, I did not call my mother. I did not text Celia. I did not ask my father for an explanation I knew he would soften into something polite and useless. I went back to the gallery. I answered client emails. I unpacked wedding gifts. I learned how quiet peace can be when no one is asking you to excuse them. Then, in July, the silence broke. My mother called 3 times in 1 hour. Celia texted asking if Rowan and I wanted to come to Charlotte for dinner with the family. And an email arrived for Rowan from Victor Mallory, asking if he might have time for a short meeting about a potential investment opportunity. Up until then, my family had never shown any real interest in what Rowan did for a living. That summer, they suddenly wanted to know everything. I stared at my phone for a long time before I set it face down on the kitchen counter. Rowan was at the stove, finishing dinner, the windows open to the humid Charleston evening. From where I stood, I could hear traffic on East Bay, a passing siren somewhere farther inland, the low clink of a spoon against the side of the pot. Ordinary sounds, normal sounds, the kind that make you feel almost foolish for letting an old wound open again. He looked over once. "You don't have to answer tonight." I know. That was the thing. I knew. At 36, I knew exactly what not answering meant. I also knew why those calls unsettled me anyway. Because my family had always been very good at making me feel unreasonable for noticing patterns they preferred to call misunderstandings. The truth was, my wedding had not been the first time I came in second. It was just the cleanest example, the easiest one to explain out loud without sounding dramatic. The Whitakers had been in Charleston long enough to act like the city was a branch of the family tree. Not old plantation money, not that kind of story, but established enough that my mother could walk into a charity luncheon at the Dewberry and know half the women in the room by first name. Diane Whitaker loved committees, donor dinners, silent auctions, engraved place cards, and anything that ended with a photographer taking pictures in front of a step and repeat. In every local magazine spread from the last 20 years, there was some version of the same image. My mother smiling in a sheath dress, my sister Celia beside her, glossy and composed and camera-ready, me somewhere at the edge, if I was there at all. Celia was 2 years younger than I was, and from the beginning she was easier for my mother to understand. She liked dresses, knew how to make conversation with adults, and never seemed uncomfortable being looked at. Even as a kid, she moved through a room as if attention were a natural resource that belonged to her. I preferred pencils, charcoal, long afternoons alone, and silence that wasn't awkward to me at all. When I was little, my mother would pause outside my bedroom door, look at the paint on my hands or the sketchbooks on the floor, and say it in that bright, half-amused tone I came to know so well. "There's Althea with that little art hobby." At 17, I had a painting selected for the Charleston Student Arts Exhibition downtown. It was the first piece I had ever made that felt like more than a school assignment. I worked on it for weeks in the garage, even in August heat that made the air feel thick enough to drink. A marsh landscape at sunset, all copper light and low water and reeds bending under wind. The opening was on a Thursday night. I had 2 tickets. I left them on the kitchen counter 3 days in advance. That same week, Celia had a high school fashion showcase. Not prom, not graduation, not even anything academic. A school fundraiser where students modeled clothes donated by local boutiques. My mother decided it mattered more. When I reminded her about the exhibition, she didn't even look guilty. She was standing at the island arranging earrings next to her handbag. "Your sister's event is bigger." I remember looking at my father then. Robert Whitaker was still practicing law at the time, working in estate planning, always in pressed shirts even at home. He was the kind of man who could make avoidance look like good manners. He folded his newspaper, set it down, and gave me the same expression he would later use for decades whenever conflict appeared in the room. "Don't make it a big deal." So I went downtown alone. The painting sold 3 days later to a retired couple from Mount Pleasant, and my mother said that was wonderful, in the same tone she might have used if I'd told her I found a sweater on sale. Celia's program from the fashion show stayed on the kitchen counter for a month. Things like that happened so often, they stopped feeling like events and started feeling like weather, predictable, seasonal, part of the climate of our house. I graduated from Savannah College of Art and Design in 2010 with a BFA in painting. I was 22, full of the kind of certainty that only exists before life has a chance to negotiate with you. I moved back to Charleston because I loved the city, because I knew the light here, because every time I thought about leaving for New York or Chicago, I felt tired instead of excited. My mother called Charleston a fine place to come home to, which was her polite way of saying she approved of me staying near enough to be managed. The gallery didn't happen overnight. I worked for other people first. Framing shop, assistant at a design studio, part-time art handler, weekend classes for kids. By the time I opened Whitaker Contemporary in 2018, I had spent 8 years building toward it and saving every extra dollar I could. The opening night felt enormous to me. Clean white walls, new signage, wine glasses lined up on a folding table in the back office, local artists I admired standing in my space, talking about work I had chosen to hang. My mother said she would try to stop by after a board dinner. She never came. Celia posted beach photos from Miami that same evening, all sun and gold bracelets and rooftop cocktails. My father came by the gallery 2 days later on his lunch break, stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his pockets, and nodded once. "It's nice," he said. That was as close as he got to pride. And still, I kept showing up for them. I flew to Austin for Celia's wedding in 2021. and spent the morning of the rehearsal dinner retying floral ribbons because the planner was behind schedule and my mother was on the verge of tears over centerpieces. I mailed birthday gifts. I called on holidays. I sat through family dinners where Celia's life was treated like breaking news and mine was summarized in one sentence between salad and the entree. Then, in the fall of 2022, I went down to Savannah for an exhibition opening tied to a community arts initiative. Rowan Fletcher was one of the sponsors. I did not know that when I met him. I just noticed a man standing quietly in front of a mixed media piece for so long that I got curious. He asked me what I thought of the show. I told him one room was overhung and one artist needed editing. He laughed. That was the first thing I learned about Rowan. He liked honesty when it wasn't performative. By the time I brought him home to Charleston months later, I already knew he was private. He listened more than he spoke. He never dropped names, never tried to impress anyone, never filled silence just because other people were uncomfortable with it. At dinner, my mother asked him what he did. Investment work. That was all he offered. That was all she asked. When I told my family we were engaged near the end of 2023, my mother looked at the ring, then at Rowan, then back at me. "Well," she said, "I hope he's steady." Celia smiled over the rim of her wineglass. "That's nice." I remember laughing a little then, because the alternative was admitting that part of me had expected more. Still, when I mailed the invitations for our wedding, I addressed 24 to my side of the family, and I believed they would come. For a while, I let myself believe silence could become a permanent arrangement. It was easier that way. I went back to the gallery on Tuesday after the wedding and unlocked the front door at 10 like I always did. I answered emails from artists, reviewed framing invoices, met with a couple from Kiowa who wanted something large for a stairwell, and pretended my life had simply shifted into a cleaner shape. Rowan never pushed me to talk about my family. He just made coffee in the mornings, asked whether I wanted company at the gallery, and let me come to things in my own time. By June, Charleston had turned thick and bright and damp in the way it always does. Tourists filled King Street. The air inside the gallery carried that familiar mix of paper, paint, and quiet money. I was good there. Better than good, actually. Work gave me edges again. It gave me tasks, and tasks are a mercy when you are trying not to replay the same morning in your head. My family stayed mostly absent. No one called to apologize for missing the wedding. No one sent flowers. My father mailed a short card with a check inside, as if a gesture could pass for remorse if it was folded neatly enough. I tore the check in half and dropped it in the kitchen trash. My mother texted once in late May, asking whether we had gotten back from our mini honeymoon safely. Celia liked one of the wedding photos Rowan's sister posted on Instagram and never commented. I did not answer any of it. That summer, the quiet between us stretched long enough to feel almost stable. Not healed, just settled into shape. What I did not know then was that the same summer was going badly for Celia and Victor. Victor Mallory liked to talk about growth the way some men talk about weather or football. His company, Mallory Pay, had launched in 2022 and spent 2 years earning him just enough attention to become ambitious in public. It was a fintech platform aimed at small businesses, mostly payment processing, invoicing, and short-term cash flow tools for regional service companies. The kind of business that sounds practical and boring until someone on a podcast calls it disruptive. At family dinners before the wedding, Victor had a way of leaning back in his chair and making every sentence sound like a pitch. "We're scaling fast. We're entering 3 new markets. Series A is where things get serious." My mother adored him because he sounded expensive. My father respected him because he wore confidence like a tailored suit. Celia adored the version of him who booked rooftop dinners in Austin and knew how to work a room full of strangers within 10 minutes. I mostly found him exhausting. Still, I understood enough to know what it meant when a startup needed fresh money. The first couple of years are all velocity and optimism. After that, people start asking harder questions. By early 2025, Mallory Pay needed a Series A round of around $12 million if Victor wanted to expand at the speed he had promised. He began traveling more. Atlanta, Charlotte, Raleigh, Nashville, anywhere there were investors, conferences, private dinners, or panels with words like innovation and impact printed on the backdrop. I only knew pieces of this because Charleston is not that large, because people talk, and because Celia had always treated social media as both diary and billboard. Even when I stopped responding to her, I could still see enough from a distance. Airport lounges, hotel balconies, new dresses, smiling photos with captions about big weeks and bold moves. Then, sometime in the spring, the tone shifted. The posts were fewer. Victor's smile looked tighter. Celia stopped using phrases like exciting season and major things ahead. That alone would not have caught my attention if not for one small thing Rowan mentioned over dinner one night. Mallory Pay crossed my inbox months ago. I looked up from my plate. What does that mean? It means the firm saw them. It doesn't mean I did. That was Rowan, precise even in casual conversation. Fletcher Impact Partners had analysts, advisors, and layers between inquiry and decision. Rowan did not sit in a glass office personally reviewing every deck that came through Atlanta. Did you tell me that before? No. Why not? He set his fork down. Because it had nothing to do with you. That answer irritated me for about 5 seconds before I realized he was right. I did not ask what came of it, and he did not volunteer. That was the end of the conversation. At least for us. Somewhere else, Victor had started researching every investor still worth chasing. Fletcher Impact Partners kept appearing on those lists. The firm had a reputation across the Southeast for backing companies that could make money without sounding soulless while doing it. Rowan rarely did interviews. He rarely appeared on podcasts or conference stages. Most press around the firm focused on portfolio companies, community programs, or annual giving reports. If you were casually aware of Fletcher Impact Partners, you could know the name for months without being able to pick the founder out of a lineup. Which is exactly what happened. Victor apparently saw Rowan Fletcher on paper long before he connected him to the man who had sat across from him at dinner and passed the cornbread in my mother's dining room. The connection came from an old article. A community arts initiative in Savannah from 2022. A small piece about private funding and public programming. There was a photo attached. And there, standing beside a mural project with his sleeves rolled up, was Rowan. Celia told me later, though not that week, that Victor turned his laptop toward her and just stared. "Isn't that your sister's husband?" She thought it was a coincidence at first. Fletcher is not exactly an impossible last name, but then they looked again. The date, the city, the firm. The face. Rowan Fletcher was Rowan Fletcher, not a man in investment work. The founder of Fletcher Impact Partners, the one they had been trying to get in front of for months. Victor did what men like Victor always do when a locked door suddenly turns out to be attached to someone they know. He shifted immediately from frustration to strategy. If you can get Althea to sit down with us, we're in. Celia called my mother that same night. I did not hear that conversation, but I know enough about both of them to picture it exactly. Celia pacing, my mother going quiet in the way she always did when she was rearranging reality fast enough to suit herself. Then the conclusion. Short, practical, shameless. Call your sister. And not long after that, For the first time since she missed my wedding, my mother started dialing my number again. By the time we checked into the hotel across from the High Museum that September, I already knew my mother was going to show up. Not because she told me directly. Diane preferred the softer route now. She left voicemails that sounded almost tender, asked if I had settled into married life, mentioned family dinners in Charlotte as if we had all simply drifted apart for no particular reason. Celia texted me photos of her baby girl in pale pink sleepwear and asked whether I wanted to meet my niece before she got any bigger. Victor sent Rowan 2 more emails, each one polished enough to sound respectful and urgent enough to reveal the real reason. Rowan never hid them from me. He would turn his laptop toward me at breakfast, let me read the message, then close it again without commentary. On the flight from Charleston to Atlanta, he sat by the window and read through notes for his remarks. I looked at the skyline appear beneath us in gray blocks and glass and tried to slow my breathing. "You can leave early if you want," he said. "I'm not leaving." He nodded once, as if that settled something important. The gala was black tie, the kind of event where everyone smiled like they belonged exactly where they were. The lobby was full of soft light, floral arrangements, and the low hum of people who were used to money. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns that looked effortless in the expensive way. Donors, founders, nonprofit directors, board members. Every few feet, someone stopped Rowan to shake his hand. He moved through it all with the same quiet ease he had in jeans at home. No performance, no extra charm, just composure. I stayed near him at first, then drifted a little as the reception opened up. I spoke with 2 women from a literacy initiative in Birmingham and a museum trustee from Savannah who knew the gallery. I was balancing a champagne flute I had barely touched when I saw them. My mother first. Diane wore deep blue silk and the expression she reserved for rooms she intended to conquer. Celia stood beside her in a fitted cream dress, one hand resting lightly on her clutch, her face more tense than polished for once. Victor was with them, scanning the room with a focus that made the whole evening around him feel secondary. For a second, none of them saw me. Then Celia did. Her smile came too fast. "There you are." She stepped in as if we were cousins at Thanksgiving instead of sisters who had not had an honest conversation in over a year. Diane followed a beat later, warm and graceful and almost convincing. "Althea, sweetheart." She kissed the air beside my cheek. "You look beautiful." "Thanks. We've been trying to catch you before the program started." I noticed. Her smile held. "We thought maybe tonight could be a fresh start." That phrase almost made me laugh. A fresh start, as if we had misplaced a few months instead of an entire history. Before I could answer, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly and the room began to shift toward the stage. People found their seats. Someone touched Rowan's arm and guided him toward the front. Our table was near the stage. My family's was farther back and slightly to the left, close enough to see clearly, not close enough to pretend we were together. The opening remarks were brief. A board member welcomed everyone, thanked the sponsors, spoke about educational access and community investment. Then he began introducing Rowan. He did not say, "My husband works in investment." He did not say, "He supports some nonprofit work in Atlanta." He gave the full version. Founder of Fletcher Impact Partners, architect of one of the most respected impact investment firms in the Southeast, a man whose work had shaped funding across multiple states for more than a decade. The applause started before Rowan reached the podium, then rose again after the introduction ended. It was not a polite little room sound. It rolled, 400 people standing, clapping, turning toward him. I looked back without meaning to. My mother had gone still. Celia's mouth was parted slightly, her face blank in the way people get when they are trying to rearrange the last 2 years of memory in real time. Victor did not clap until it was impossible not to. Even then, his expression looked tight enough to hurt. Rowan spoke for 7 minutes, warm, concise, impossible to accuse of grandstanding. He talked about local partnerships, apprenticeships, after-school arts funding, the responsibility that comes with capital, the difference between scale and usefulness. The room listened. When he finished, people rose again. I sat very still with my hands in my lap until the applause softened and dinner service began. My mother came to me before the salads hit the table. "Can we talk for 1 minute?" I set down my napkin and stepped with her toward the edge of the room near a sculpture alcove where the music was lower but not low enough for privacy. She clasped her hands. "You should have told us." "Told you what?" She exhaled sharply, like I was forcing her into discomfort. That Rowan was this significant. I looked at her for a long second. "You never asked." "That's not fair." "No." I kept my voice quiet. That was the only way to keep it sharp. What wasn't fair was you RSVPing yes to my wedding and then texting me at 9:12 that morning to say you were staying in Austin. Her posture changed then, only slightly, but enough. "We were overwhelmed with Celia's event. You were busy." "That's what I said." "No, you said you'd be there." I could see 2 women near the champagne station glance over, then politely away. My mother lowered her voice. "We are not doing this here. You chose here." Her eyes flicked toward the ballroom, toward the stage, toward the room that now knew exactly who Rowan was. "I'm trying to reconnect with my daughter." I held her gaze. For the first time that night, her composure cracked at the edges. Before she could answer, Victor appeared at Rowan's side across the room. I saw it happen in fragments through moving servers and candlelight. Victor leaning in, Rowan turning toward him, expression unreadable. The conversation looked brief. Then Rowan's face settled into that same calm stillness I had seen in the church, in the kitchen, on airplanes, everywhere that mattered. He listened. Victor spoke again, more earnestly this time. Rowan said something brief and even. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood, but I caught enough. The firm had already reviewed Mallory pay. The numbers had not held up. My mother followed my line of sight and went pale. When I walked back toward the table, Rowan was just rising from his chair. He reached for my hand once, lightly, and I knew before he said anything that whatever came next had already begun. The first thing I noticed after Atlanta was how quiet my phone became. Not immediately. The week after the gala was noisy in a thin, brittle way. 2 missed calls from my mother on Monday, a long text from Celia on Tuesday that began with, "I've been thinking a lot," and ended with, "Maybe we should talk." One short email from my father on Wednesday with the subject line, "Just checking in." Victor never contacted me directly again, and Rowan never mentioned him unless I asked. Then, little by little, the noise dropped off. October in Charleston is the closest thing this city has to mercy. The heat backs away, the light softens. Tourists still wander the streets, but slower, less frenzied, as if the whole place has exhaled. I started opening the gallery doors in the morning with the kind of steady calm I had wanted for years, and only recently understood how to make for myself. Whitaker Contemporary had a strong fall season. A landscape painter from Asheville sold out her small room in 2 weeks. A corporate client in Mount Pleasant commissioned 3 large abstract pieces for a law office lobby. I rehung the front room twice in 1 month and spent an entire Thursday afternoon on the floor with measuring tape, painter's tape, and a cup of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink it. Real life continued, which in its own way felt like the reward. At breakfast one morning, Rowan slid his phone across the table toward me. Not with drama, just with the same quiet practicality he used for everything. The subject line on the screen was from someone at one of the firms that had been in talks with Mallory Pay. The message itself was short enough that I understood the shape of it before I finished reading. More diligence, more questions, numbers that did not line up cleanly. I handed the phone back. "That's moving fast." He nodded. "It usually does once confidence shifts." He did not sound pleased. He did not sound vindicated either, just factual. Rowan had never been interested in punishing people for disappointing me. If anything, he was almost stubbornly committed to letting cause and effect do their own work. By early November, 2 investors had pulled back from Mallory Pay, not because of gossip, not because of me, and not because Rowan made some dramatic phone call behind closed doors. The numbers had been pressed on, and they had not held. User growth, projected revenue, conversion claims from Victor's pitch deck, enough of it raised concerns that the room had changed around him. In Atlanta, that sort of thing travels fast without ever becoming public in a way you can point to. People stop returning messages with the same speed. Meetings become tentative, warm introductions cool. Nobody announces the shift. They just stop leaning in. Charleston worked differently. Here, consequences arrived dressed as concern. My mother's social circle did not shun people outright. It edited them, quietly. Invitations narrowed. Committees restructured. A board seat that had always seemed secure suddenly required fresh energy and rotating leadership. By Thanksgiving, Diane was no longer chairing the spring fundraisers she had run for 4 straight years. No one told me directly, of course. I heard it the way everyone hears things in a city like Charleston, through tone, through absence, through one acquaintance mentioning over wine at a gallery event that my mother seemed to be taking a step back from public commitments this season. I almost laughed at the phrase, taking a step back, as if any of it had been voluntary. Celia kept trying, but differently than before. No more polished family language, no more photos of the baby as bait. Her messages got shorter and less strategic. "I'm not asking for anything. I know this looks bad. I don't think I've been honest with myself about a lot of things." For a while, I ignored them, not to punish her, just because every reply felt like it would cost more energy than I wanted to spend. Then, one Sunday afternoon in late November, while Rowan was on the porch with a legal pad and a stack of notes for a board meeting, I answered. I did not call, I texted. "What do you want from me?" The reply came so fast she had clearly been holding the phone. Not money, not Rowan, not a favor. Just honesty for once. I stared at that for a long time. Then I typed back. Honesty would have looked like showing up. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, came back. "You're right." That was the first message from Celia in my entire life that did not try to win anything. A week later, my father emailed me again. No check this time, no vague language, just 6 lines in plain black type from a man who had built a career on careful words, and for most of my life, used them to avoid saying anything that mattered. I should have spoken up years ago. I saw what was happening. I kept telling myself peace was the same thing as decency. It wasn't. I'm sorry. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. I did not write back that day, or the next, but I did not delete it either. That was as much generosity as I had available. December came in with holiday lights in the store windows on King Street and tourists buying ornaments they did not need. Rowan and I hosted a small dinner at home for a few friends. I cooked too much. Nadia brought pie. We opened a bottle of wine we had been saving since the wedding. At one point, Rowan caught me smiling from across the room for no reason beyond the simple fact that I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own life, with no dread attached to it. Later that night, while we loaded plates into the dishwasher, he looked at me and said the thing I had not realized he had been waiting months to know. "How do you feel?" I dried my hands on a dish towel and thought about it seriously. Lighter. He nodded, as if that was the right answer. Because it was. The relief never came from watching my family lose ground. It never came from Victor's problems or my mother's shrinking social calendar, or even the look on Celia's face in Atlanta when she finally understood what she had treated as expendable. It came from something quieter than that. I stopped organizing my worth around whether they could recognize it. I stopped rehearsing conversations that might finally make them fair. I stopped mistaking access for love. By the new year, I could say my mother's name without my chest tightening. I could think about the wedding without hearing every empty chair scrape against the floor in my memory. I could imagine seeing my family again someday, and know that if it happened, it would be on terms that no longer required me to shrink. Sometimes they feel like opening your front door in the morning and noticing the air is easier to breathe. If you have ever had to set that kind of boundary with your own family, and if it took you a long time to trust yourself enough to keep it, I would genuinely like to hear your story.